The screech of tires outside ripped me from the newspaper. I slammed it down, frustration burning in my gut. There she was, all smiles, arms slung around Mark's shoulders like they were old friends. Mark, her coworker, the one she wouldn't shut up about lately. Force work dinner, she'd said. Just got a show face, honey. Honey, I scoffed. We hadn't used that in months. Mark, all charm and practiced smiles, was unloading boxes from her car. They were laughing, a touch too loud, a touch too familiar. My weekend getaway, the one we planned for months, suddenly felt like a bad joke. The door slammed shut behind me. Early, Sarah, my wife, asked, a touch too bright. Just saw the welcoming committee, I said, my voice flat. Her smile faltered for a second. Mark's just helping me bring stuff in. Project deadline coming up, you know? Project deadline? Since when did Sarah, the queen of 8-hour days, stay late on Fridays? My gaze drifted to the abandoned boxes, camping gear, the same stuff we were supposed to be using for our getaway. Right, I mumbled, the suspicion a bitter lump in my throat. The evening was a blur of forced small talk and stolen glances between Sarah and Mark. Every inside joke, every shared laugh felt like a punch to the gut. By the time we left, my head throbbed, and the once exciting weekend stretched before me like a minefield. Back home, the silence was deafening. Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, humming a tune that did little to hide the tension. I grabbed her phone from the counter to charge it. A stupid, impulsive move. A notification popped up. A text from Mark. My heart lurched. I knew I shouldn't, but my fingers tapped the screen, revealing a string of messages filled with smiley faces and playful banter. My blood ran cold. This wasn't work stuff. Weekend plans all set? The last message read. Sarah walked in, her face hardening as she saw the phone. She snatched it back, her eyes blazing. It's nothing, just work. But the lie hung heavy in the air, a suffocating weight settling on my chest. That night I barely slept, my mind replaying the scene, the text, the way Sarah looked at Mark. The once familiar scent of her shampoo now felt like a stranger's. The weekend that was supposed to be a chance to reconnect became a chasm between us. A silent accusation hanging in the stale air. And as dawn broke, casting a pale light on the abandoned camping gear in the corner, I knew things were never going to be the same. 3 days, 3 agonizing days of silence from Miller investigations. My stomach churned like a washing machine on high spin. Was it a dead end? Had I wasted the money, the one thing I could ill afford right now? The doorbell finally chimed, the sound echoing through the tense quiet of the house. I flung the door open, the private investigator standing there, a manila envelope clutched in his hand. His face was unreadable. Got something for you, he said, his voice gruff. I ripped the envelope open, the photos inside tumbling onto the coffee table. My breath hitched. There they were, Sarah and Mark, arms wrapped around each other, laughing at a restaurant. A kiss stolen on a darkened street corner. The evidence, stark and undeniable, slammed into me like a physical blow. My vision swam with a mix of anger and betrayal. Sarah walked in at that moment, her smile faltering as she saw the photos scattered on the table. What's this? She stammered, her voice tight. Don't play down, my spat, shoving the photos in her face. What the hell is this, Sarah? The color drained from her cheeks, but her defiance sparked. It's nothing, she lied, snatching a photo. We were just what, I roared, my voice thick with rage. Just having an affair, just making a fool out of me? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. The hurt, the anger, it all boiled over. We were supposed to be a team, and she turned traitor. You never made time for me, she yelled back, her voice cracking. You were always too busy with work, too distant. Blame shifting, classic, but it wouldn't work this time. Don't try to twist this around, I shot back. There's no excuse for what you did. She opened her mouth to retort, but I cut her off. Get out, the word tasted like ash in my mouth, but it needed to be said. Silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by her shaky breaths. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the investigator, who stood impassively by the door. Shame flickered in her gaze for a fleeting moment before she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The house echoed with the sound, and a wave of loneliness washed over me. But beneath it there was a flicker of something else, a cold, hard resolve. The photos on the table weren't just proof of betrayal. They were a war declaration. And I wouldn't go down without a fight. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow over the office. But the air crackled with something far more potent: gossip. Whispers followed me like a shadow as I walked down the hallway, stolen glances and hushed giggles punctuating the morning routine. It didn't take a genius to figure out why. News of Sarah's little extracurricular activities with Mark had spread like wildfire. The same Mark who sat across from me, a sickening smirk plastered on his face. "Morning, John," he chirped, his voice dripping with false cheer. I ignored him, the urge to deck him a right hook burning in my gut. The rest of the day was a blur of awkward silences and pointed stares. My colleagues, once friendly faces, now seemed to view me with a mix of pity and something else. A hint of schadenfreude that twisted my stomach. Mark, the weasel, used the situation to his advantage. He hovered around the boss's door, dropping hints and casually mentioning his late nights finishing up projects. Projects that Sarah conveniently was also helping with. By lunchtime my appetite was gone. I sat alone in the break room, drowning my sorrows in lukewarm coffee. My phone buzzed with a notification. A Facebook post from a mutual friend. A passive-aggressive comment clearly aimed at Sarah. The anger simmered inside me, threatening to boil over. Back at my desk, another message popped up. This time a private message. It was Sarah's sister, someone I'd always considered close. "I can't believe it," it read. "I'm so disappointed in her. You deserve better." The message offered a flicker of comfort, but it was quickly drowned out by the sting of betrayal. Not just from Sarah but from everyone around me. The office, once a place of routine and camaraderie, now felt like a hostile environment. Every corner held a judgmental stare. Every conversation a hushed reference to my shattered marriage. The humiliation was suffocating, a constant reminder of the mess my life had become. As I left that day, the weight of the world seemed to press down on me. The once familiar walk home felt like a journey through a battlefield. The fight for my future, for my self-respect, had just begun. And I, the wounded warrior, had to find the strength to stand tall, even in a world that seemed determined to knock me down. The silence in the house was deafening. Sarah's clothes lay abandoned on the chair, a forgotten scent of her perfume hanging in the air. It had been a week since I'd walked out, the walls suddenly feeling like they were closing in on me. The lawyer's words echoed in my head. Temporary separation, a fancy term for the gaping wound in our marriage. The knot in my stomach tightened as I heard a knock on the door. It wasn't Sarah, it was Mike, my old college buddy. A tall drink of water with a concerned frown etched on his face. "Hey man," he said, his voice gruff. "Heard things got rough." I grunted, a wave of anger washing over me. Rough wasn't even close. Betrayal, humiliation, that's what it was. "You all right?" Mike asked, his gaze scanning the sparsely furnished apartment. "Yeah, just peachy," I mumbled, sarcasm dripping from my voice. He pulled up a chair. "Look," he said, his tone serious, "divorce is ugly, believe me, but you gotta keep your head above water." He was right, lawyer bills were piling up, and the thought of Sarah potentially hiding money only added fuel to the fire. "She moved out her stuff," I blurted out, needing to vent. "But I wouldn't be surprised if she stashed some things away first." Mike leaned back, a thoughtful look on his face. "You got any proof, bank statements, anything?" Proof, the word echoed in my head. I thought back to the joint safety deposit box at the bank. We hadn't used it in ages, but "There's a safety deposit box," I admitted. "But it needs both signatures to open it." Mike's eyes lit up. "Maybe not anymore." He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. "There's a new law in our state. If there's infidelity involved, a spouse can request sole access to a joint account." A spark of hope flickered within me. This wasn't about revenge, it was about getting what was rightfully mine. "You serious?" I asked, a tremor in my voice. "Dead serious," Mike said, a determined glint in his eyes. "Let's get you squared away." A new battle line had been drawn. The anger was still there, raw and burning. But with Mike by my side, I felt a flicker of something else. A chance to fight back, to navigate this mess with a bit more control. The road ahead was long and winding, but for the first time since the world seemed to crumble, I felt a glimmer of hope. The bank manager cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between me and the document in his hand. "Mr. Smith," he began, his voice tight, "it appears there are discrepancies in your wife's spending habits." Discrepancies? That was putting it mildly. The bank statement listed a string of unfamiliar charges, expensive dinners, luxury hotel stays, all happening during nights Sarah claimed to be working late. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't just spending sprees, this was financing an affair. Anger, hot and raw, coursed through me. These charges, I choked out, slamming the statement on the table, they're all from around the same time. The manager nodded, his face sympathetic. Client confidentiality obviously gave him pause, but the evidence spoke for itself. These dates coincide with the period where Mrs. Smith requested increased access to a previously dormant safety deposit box. The box, the one we hadn't touched in years. My stomach churned. Can you tell me if anything valuable was removed? He shook his head. Unfortunately, no. However, based on these transactions, it appears funds were definitely transferred elsewhere. My mind raced. Hidden accounts, that was it. Proof of Sarah's betrayal. Not just an emotional one, but a financial one as well. I need to know where that money went, I said, my voice tight with determination. The manager explained the limitations of client privacy, but with a court order. I knew what I had to do. Later, armed with the bank statement and a newfound sense of purpose, I marched into Mike's office. He whistled as he scanned the document. Hidden accounts, huh? Looks like your wife wasn't just playing fast and loose with your heart. There's more, I said, my voice grim. I explained about the safety deposit box, the missing funds. Mike leaned back, a crafty glint in his eyes. Let's get dirty, he declared. He spent the next hour outlining a plan. It wouldn't be pretty, but it would expose Mark for the snake he was. The next day, an anonymous email landed in the inbox of Sarah's company HR department. It contained an itemized list of Mark's late-night expenses, courtesy of Sarah's hidden accounts, along with a detailed timeline of their affair. The satisfaction wasn't sweet, but it was a start. A week later, the news broke. Mark was fired, his reputation in tatters. The whispers in the office shifted. The pitying glances now aimed at him. It wasn't revenge exactly, but a dose of karma served cold. My fight was far from over, but as I watched Mark slink out of the building, head hung low, a sliver of vindication warmed the cold anger in my chest. This was just the first blow. The war for the truth, for what was rightfully mine, had begun. The screen glowed like a battlefield map, the comments a barrage of fire aimed at Sarah and Mark. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and defiance coursing through me. I'd hit post on the anonymous account exposing their affair. A move I hadn't planned, driven by a surge of raw anger. The image, a loved-up selfie from Sarah's forgotten Facebook page, was a dead giveaway. The comments exploded, a mix of shock, disgust, and schadenfreude. Mark, the supposed rising star at his company, was now a social media pariah. Guilt gnawed at the edges of my satisfaction. This wasn't the high road, but the thought of them getting away with it, of Sarah using our finances to fuel her betrayal, made my blood boil. The next few days were a whirlwind. My phone buzzed with notifications, a mix of outraged reactions from Sarah's friends and furious messages from Mark himself, all drowned out by the silent treatment I was giving them. No answer, no response, just a wall of silence. Mike, ever the strategist, saw opportunity in the chaos. Use this, he said, his eyes gleaming. He outlined legal loopholes that could expose Mark's shady financial dealings, potentially impacting Sarah's settlement. It wasn't noble, but in the ruthless world of divorce law, every advantage counted. Days turned into weeks, the silence in my apartment deafening. Sarah's attempts to contact me went unanswered. It was excruciating but necessary. No more manipulation, no more false promises. This was about rebuilding my life, brick by painful brick. One evening at a work event, I saw her across the room. Her eyes widened, a flicker of desperation replacing the usual smugness. I forced a smile, not at her, but at a colleague as I engaged in light conversation. The message was clear. I was moving on. The hurt lingered, a dull ache under my ribs. But the anger fueled a new drive at work. I focused on every deadline, every project, channeling my emotions into something productive. Maybe even a promotion was in sight. The thought of therapy crossed my mind, a voice whispering about the need to heal. But for now I couldn't afford the time or the luxury. The legal battle loomed like a dark cloud, lawyer bills stacking up on both sides. The stalemate stretched on, negotiations going nowhere. Asset division, spousal support, everything seemed to be a point of contention. The once familiar house, now a symbol of shattered dreams, seemed to mock me as I drove past. The possibility of a trial, long and expensive, hung heavy in the air. The anger might fade, but the financial strain of this war was a new reality. Still, I wouldn't give in. I wouldn't let them win, not again. This was about more than money. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, piece by agonizing piece. My phone buzzed on the table, the caller ID a jumbled mess of unknown numbers. Usually I wouldn't answer, but a nagging suspicion gnawed at me. Hello? I said, my voice wary. Mr. Smith? A frantic voice crackled through the receiver. It's Mark's ex-wife, Lisa. You gotta listen to me. My jaw clenched. The last person I expected to hear from was the woman Mark had supposedly left for Sarah. Intrigue warring with caution, I listened. Over the next 10 minutes, Lisa spilled her guts. Mark, she claimed, had a history of infidelity, weaving elaborate lies to juggle relationships. She even had emails, proof of his manipulative tactics. He told me the same things about Sarah, she choked out, said she was controlling, unhappy. It was all a lie. The world tilted on its axis. Could it be true? Was Sarah as much of a victim as I'd been a fool? A flicker of hope, fragile and dangerous, flickered within me. Hanging up, I stared at the phone, thoughts swirling. Mike's voice cut through the fog. What was that? I explained Lisa's call, the evidence she offered. An incredulous whistle escaped his lips. Hold on, he said, his fingers flying across his keyboard. Let's see if this story checks out. An hour later, we were staring at a damning paper trail. Credit card statements from Sarah, maxed out with luxury purchases coinciding with Mark's late nights at work. The hidden accounts, a web of deceit spun by both of them. Anger flared, hot and furious, but it was quickly eclipsed by a crushing sense of betrayal. Not just from Sarah, but from the picture of a happy marriage I'd been clinging to. The next morning, the lawyer dropped a bombshell. An old college buddy, Sarah's best friend from before me, had reached out. Apparently, Sarah had been reaching out to her, expressing regret, a desperate hope to salvage the marriage. The news left me numb. Could Sarah's tears be genuine? Or was this just another ploy? Days blurred into weeks. Lisa's story, backed by evidence, became part of the legal proceedings, weakening Sarah's side. Mark, facing the consequences of his lies, attempted to reconcile with Lisa. A desperate move that backfired spectacularly. The tables had turned, and the air crackled with a sense of twisted justice. As for me, I was adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Part of me, a small, vulnerable part, yearned to believe Sarah's remorse. But the other part, scarred and wary, held firm. Trust, once broken, wouldn't be easily mended. The road ahead was far from clear, but for the first time since the world had shattered, the future held a glimmer of possibility, however faint. The journey to healing, to whatever lay beyond this wreckage, had just begun. The air crackled with nervous energy as we sat across from each other, the sterile conference room a far cry from the warmth of our old kitchen. Months of negotiations, accusations, and emotional turmoil had culminated in this moment, the final settlement. My lawyer droned on about asset distribution, spousal support, minimal thankfully, but the numbers blurred. All I saw was Sarah, her face pale and drawn, a stark contrast to the confident woman I once knew. Did she even recognize the man staring back at her? A stranger forged in the fires of betrayal? The final gavel came down, a dull thud that echoed in the silence. We signed the papers, a final, irrevocable severing of ties. Relief washed over me, a heavy weight finally lifted. This wasn't victory, not exactly, but a bittersweet closure. Leaving the office, I blinked in the sunlight, the world seeming sharper, more vibrant. The anger that had fueled me for so long was fading, replaced by a quiet emptiness. Mike, ever the optimist, clapped me on the shoulder. Time to rebuild, he boomed. Rebuilding. The word hung in the air. It wouldn't be easy. Therapy sessions, filled with awkward silences and probing questions, became my new routine. Slowly, tentatively, I started to untangle the mess of emotions, the hurt, the anger, the lingering flicker of love. Forgiveness, a foreign concept, began to take root, a fragile seed pushing through the cracks of pain. Dating, once a source of joy, felt like navigating a minefield. Every smile, every shared joke, held the potential for another heartbreak. But with time the fear receded, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Coffee dates turned into weekend getaways, tentative laughter into something more real. Life after divorce wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a new beginning, written one uncertain step at a time. I focused on work, throwing myself into projects, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of deadlines and achievements. The empty house, once a constant reminder of what I'd lost, slowly transformed into a reflection of who I was becoming: stronger, more independent. Then the unexpected happened. A knock on the door, a familiar face framed by the evening light. It was Sarah, her eyes red rimmed, a hesitant smile playing